What if the price of being the good guy is losing yourself completely? I'm so tired of hearing women complain about where all the good men are. You know what I think? They're out there. They're just so busy trying to not be toxic that they've made themselves invisible. We've swung from one extreme to another. So now instead of dealing with assholes, we're dating ghosts. You have two terrible options in the dating world. Door number one, the obvious red flags who think emotions are for weaklings and leadership means being the loudest jackass in the room. Or door number two, guys who are so terrified of taking up space that there's nothing actually there. Sure, they're nice and they're safe, but they're also the type to suggest going Dutch on the first date because making any kind of move feels too risky, or it's not in their financial plan. And here's the darker part of all of it. Men are dying by suicide at 3 times the rate of women, but they won't ask for help. And honestly, I get it. The message they're getting is confusing as hell. Be vulnerable but not weak. Be strong but not aggressive. Lead but don't be controlling. No wonder they're paralyzed. The thing is, we're all paying for this mess. When the men in our lives are walking around dead inside, our relationships suffer. Our kids learn that strength means shutting down. Everyone loses when half the population is too scared to show up authentically. Carl Jung wrote about the wounded healer, the person whose deepest pain becomes their greatest gift. A lot of men have learned to be incredibly sensitive to everyone else's feelings because they've completely numbed their own. They'll bend over backwards to make you happy while slowly suffocating inside.
I used to believe that my job as a man was to hold it all together, even if that meant that I got crushed from the inside out. So I was raised on a script that a lot of men are familiar with, that our worth is measured by how quietly we can carry our burden, that love means sacrificing ourselves, and that strength is never asking for help.
Sometimes your body has to scream because you've been ignoring the whispers for years. A brain tumor on your intuition center? Erectile dysfunction shutting down your sexual power? That is not subtle. That's your soul throwing a tantrum because you've been living someone else's script for way too long. This isn't about fixing broken men so they can be better partners. That's kind of manipulative if you ask me. This is about what happens when someone stops performing and starts being real. The energy shifts. The attraction comes back. The relationship becomes a place where both people can actually breathe instead of walking on eggshells. Men who have done this work don't just become better boyfriends. They become magnetic. And not because they're trying harder, but because they've stopped trying so damn hard to be what everyone else wants them to be. Today, our guest is Wathan, a men's coach who helps guys move from people-pleasing to actual leadership. After his own health crisis forced him to face how disconnected he'd become, Isaac figured out how to reclaim masculine power without becoming a total dick about it. So in this episode, you'll discover why your body rebels when you're living someone else's script, the third option between toxic masculinity and invisible masculinity, and how real masculine power actually improves intimate relationships. You know what I'm tired of? Spending mental energy deciding what to eat. It's not just the cooking or the shopping either. It's the constant decisions. What sounds good? What do I have ingredients for? Is this healthy enough? Do I have time to make this? But I've learned that shopping, planning, and cooking food really can be simple and stress-free, which is why I love Hungry Root. Hungry Root takes the stress out of mealtime by filling your cart with personalized picks and planning your week of meals, getting smarter with every order. With over 15,000 recipes to choose from each week, many ready in just 15 minutes or less, it fits into actual life. And their smart cart technology learns what I actually like and recommends groceries, recipes, and supplements tailored to my tastes. It's kind of like having a personal shopper who actually knows me. No more random ingredients that I'll never use. and they screen out over 200 additives and only source high-quality ingredients. The decision fatigue I used to have around food is just gone, and that energy goes to things that actually matter now. So take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/mindlove and use code MINDLOVE. That's hungryroot.com/mindlove, code MINDLOVE, to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/mindlove, code MINDLOVE. Welcome to the show, Isaac. I know you have been through some pretty intense experiences that shaped not only your story, but how you see yourself as a man. So let's just start with a snapshot. What led you here? What led you to what you're doing now? And how has that evolved over time?
Sure. Great to be here. So I used to believe that my job as a man was to hold it all together, even if that meant that I got crushed from the inside out. So I was raised on a script that a lot of men are familiar with, that our worth is measured by how quietly we can carry our burden, that love means sacrificing ourselves, and that strength is never asking for help. And so I built my whole identity around that. I used control as my compass, performance was my protection. But the cracks in that false masculine facade really started to show one night when I was driving to teach a yoga class about inner peace. And I had the thought that maybe I should drive my car off the side of the freeway. And in that moment, it wasn't that I wanted to die. I just didn't see a way out of living a life that wasn't mine. I was engaged. I had the multiple six-figure career. I had credentials as a yoga teacher, but inside I felt like I was underwater. I felt like I hadn't been able to take a full breath for years. And I hadn't been able to get an erection for well over a year. And doctors said that it was all in my head. But, there was a whisper in me that said that there was something more. And so for the first time in a long time, I listened to that whisper, that inner knowing, and a naturopath discovered a tumor that was sitting on my pituitary gland. It was messing up my hormones and also in the energetic seat of the third eye, right? And that message wasn't lost on me. I'd been making a lot of decisions in my life that were disconnected from my knowing, and that instead were following this script that I'd inherited. And so that tumor was really such a gift because it didn't just change my health. It called me to pay attention to me again and started dismantling this performance-driven masculinity that I've been living. And when I started listening to that whisper instead of to the world and to that script, everything started to change. Life started to open up for me in ways that it hadn't before. And I didn't get there without pain, right? I broke off my engagement. I started telling the truth, and I really had to fall apart to see the parts of me that I'd lost and come home. And that was really the start of everything for me, the start of a new life, right? Not just healing, but honesty and welcoming all these parts of me home that I'd abandoned and writing my own script of what it means to be a man. And so, a lot of men think that holding it together when you're falling apart is strength, but true strength is listening, learning how to listen to our gut, to our inner knowing, and to the part of us that knows what's true, even when the world tells us otherwise. And so that's the path I'm on right now, is living in truth and helping others do the same.
Wow, that is a really powerful story and so beautifully told. But I'm curious about that disconnect that you felt. You talked about the disconnect between what you showed the world, that sort of performative masculinity, holding it all together, probably hiding your emotions, and then what was happening internally for you at that moment. There's like health and vulnerability, but that phase that we go through where we realize, hold on, everything I've been building up until now is based kind of on a lie. Not that you meant to, but the lies that you're telling yourself. And starting from scratch can be so scary. Where did you go from there? Because I'm sure you weren't like, wait, hold on, I should get on a TikTok and cry or something like that. Is like, where did you go from there? And how did you begin to build and feel comfortable with what you were understanding, how you wanted to model manhood?
Yeah. So from that unraveling into being where I am today and getting to serve other men, there was quite a journey. And the big moment was when I ended my engagement. That was something that had been itching inside of me for a long time. And on paper, there were no real reasons that I should. Looking back, I can see it now, but I was hyper logical. I rationalized everything. And because there were no big red flags, I just didn't know how to do it. And so, but I did. And I received all this support that I didn't know was there. From that place, I thought that nobody ended engagements and that I was the worst guy in the world. And then people started coming out of the woodwork, similar stories. I ended an engagement. Looking back, it's the best decision I could have made. And so that was a big piece. And then from there, it's like I hired my first coach to understand how I had backed myself into this corner. So I started working with a coach. I traveled to India for 3 weeks by myself on a solo traveling journey because I needed to teach myself how to surrender and how to trust life because I've been gripping again, logical, rational about everything. And so life never surprised me. And so I went to India by myself for 3 weeks and just said yes. Like that was my surrender experiment. I actually read the book on the flight. I sat a 10-day Vipassana. I did a little bit of traditional talk therapy, got really consistent with my breath work practice, and had some experiences of my inner child coming home and me reparenting him. And so that's where I went from there. That was like the intermediary.
I want to actually go deeper into that inner child moment because so many people I know, myself included, it's that inner child work. And when you tell someone who hasn't really gone through it, like, okay, what does that look like? You reparenting your inner child. What were some of the things that came up that were vulnerable? And what does that process of reparenting look like, both in that moment of meditation and then where you take it from there?
Yeah, there's a wonderful book by a guy named John Bradshaw. It's called Homecoming, and it's all about the inner child. And that was really my experience. It's like I compare it to there's an estranged father who's gone for 10 years. He's left his son behind, and then one day he comes home, and there's this emotional catharsis of the reunion, and then there's the years, the months and years of work that must happen in order for trust and reconnection to be rebuilt. So my breathwork experience, it was actually a session with my coach where I'd found this part of me that I left behind, this joyous, curious, playful part of me that I'd completely forgotten about, that I decided couldn't come with me into my adult life, into my engagement, into my work. So I went straight from that session, drove to the breathwork session while maintaining an awareness of this part of me. It was living in my center towards my solar plexus. And the breath work, I kind of understood the relationship from that coaching session, but the breath work led me to a place where I could feel. And that was my problem for 10 years. You know, before I ended my engagement, I hadn't cried in 10 years. That moment broke me. But breath work for me was really a space where my body felt safe enough for me to start to feel. And that's where I felt this reservoir of guilt for this innocent little boy, me, that I had left behind and decided that he couldn't have a part in my life anymore, right? And it's the creativity, it's the imagination. And I was living a life as an adult that was far less than imaginative, right? It was pretty much to the T, white picket fence, go to college, get a job, find a nice girl, get a dog, get engaged, and that's as far as I got, right? If my inner child had had a part of that conversation, he probably could have poked some holes in it and helped me see things earlier.
I still really like white picket fences, although I don't have one, and the dog's always a great idea. But
The
I know
dog
what you
is a
mean.
great
Like,
idea.
we so often don't even realize that we can question what's modeled for us. And it blows my mind how many people get to that and they're just like, wait, like they don't even realize that their dream isn't theirs, that they didn't actually craft it. They're just sort of filling it in from what they've seen in the movies.
hmm It and the sad part is it takes getting there, you know? For me, it was like a pretty big thing, a pretty extensive recipe I thought I had to do to be happy, to feel fulfilled, right? And I spent years doing that. And the sad part is a lot of times it takes actually making that full recipe, spending years building these bricks of a false foundation before you get there and say, actually, this isn't giving me what was promised. Like, I got something wrong along the way. And I think there's a lot of people that just continue on that path because the pain, the embarrassment, the shame of tearing all that down and saying, I got it so wrong is too much. And so they just continue walking down that path and they wither and they die before they die.
It's like the sunken costs, where they're like, but I've
Exactly.
invested so much into this. I have such a visceral understanding of this. You know my story, and that guy that comes up in it, he was also a gambling addict. So I spent a good 2 years in casinos, in high limit rooms, but it was always like video poker. And man, the amount of times where you're like pumping hundreds into a machine and you're like, but it's going to hit any moment.
Mm,
Like, I'm going to find something in this. There's going to be gold. And you just think like maybe something will magically happen, but it just gets darker and darker and you lose yourself more and more, whether you're looking at the game of life or that damn slot machine.
yeah. And I was really hanging on to that slot pull because what's interesting about my story is that as I was feeling like this woman wasn't the woman for me, I was also experiencing this erectile dysfunction. So her and I weren't able to connect physically. And I thought, if I just figure this out and we can get sex back on the table, all of this will go away and it will feel good again and we'll be able to get married and I'll be able to continue going down this river that I've built for myself. And so I actually did, figure it out. And I started taking medication for that tumor. It was like a pretty quick fix once we knew what was happening and everything started working again. And it didn't change how I felt at all. And I was like, oh shit, that one thing I was holding out for that would have allowed me to continue living this life I worked so hard to build did nothing.
You know what's so wild about your story is just how much symbolism is in the physical that you were experiencing. And that's the case so often where it's my belief that most physical illness, if not all, is actually a manifestation of something deeper, something emotional. And sometimes it takes a lot to be able to connect. Okay, well, what about this cancer? What is it?
hmm
And it takes a little bit more of figuring out the story to connect to that illness. But for yours, it's like this thing that's connecting you to your partner, but also your literal seed of intuition, how you follow your own
hmm
guidance, both of those. What does it symbolize for you?
Yeah, I totally agree for you. I believe that nearly all of the time our bodies are our allies and not our adversaries. And actually, working with you, going through your course, Story Love, is like where I had the epiphany of like, oh my gosh, my body was actually communicating to me so directly. And so when I think about the third eye, the seat of intuition, the seat of knowing, that the tumor formed there as we're speaking in this frame because I had been fighting an intuition to end this relationship. I'd been itching at me for a couple years. Like it didn't feel totally aligned, but everything on paper. And of course, everything on paper looked good because it wasn't a rational choice that I needed to make. It was an intuitive one, right? And so me ignoring that and suppressing that, my body's like screaming through literally the creation of a tumor right there. And then the effects of that cascade down to the literal seat of my masculine power, right? My sexual organs. And it stops working. It's like the way that I was showing up as a man wasn't working. And so my story, yes, it is so interesting. I feel like so grateful to have such like a overt demonstration of how our bodies try to help us.
It's too good and too symbolic of a story not to have a book one day.
Yeah,
But
totally.
also, man, what a testimony. I don't think I realized how much you connected through the Story Love program. So that means a lot to me, obviously. But I'm curious about that path because even before you did my program and really connected your story and saw the symbolism within it, you were on the path to making your wounds your wisdom.
Hmm.
And a lot of people, again, when they feel that, like, okay, everything I've built, it can trigger a failure mentality. It can trigger the reverse if you're not really set up spiritually or with the self-development knowledge. And so how did you go from those moments of, fixing your life to realizing, okay, I want to work with men to getting as specific as you are now?
So after I ended my engagement, I took 3 months off work. I was like, I got a brain tumor. I just ended my engagement. You guys got to let me go for 3 months. And during that 3 months, I was like, I got 3 months. I want to do some traveling internationally. And India wasn't even top five on the list. I really got led there. As I said, it was my surrender experiment. I went to a yoga festival, met a woman who knew a woman. She's like, you got to go to this ashram in India. I was like, maybe. She's like, no, you have to go. And I was like, okay, it feels like I have to go. So I went, had this whole experience, but I was sitting in meditation in India, and it just like very clearly came to me that I was going to start leading men's groups because during this incredibly difficult chapter of my life where my relationship was falling apart, my whole life was falling apart, I didn't feel like I had the group of men around me that I needed to feel supported. And so, halfway selfishly, I wanted to create that for myself. And I also wanted to create that for other men. So, when I came home from India, I sent out some text messages and I led my first men's group. I think it was 8 guys in my yard in Ocean Beach, San Diego. And at the end of that men's group, people are going around sharing what their experience was like. And they're all saying things like, I don't feel so alone, or I really saw myself in that man. And as they're sharing, I'd never felt more like there was no separation from where I was and where I was meant to be. And so I kept leading those men's groups and I kept building my network of guys that I felt like were leading or at least wanted to become better. And naturally through that, I'll tell the story because it's a good one. I got coffee with a man who is now my roommate, and we never hung out. And first coffee, we ended up talking for 3 hours. And at this point, it's like I'm not working. I'm thinking that I want to coach. I got a life coaching certificate 6 years ago, but life hadn't like delivered the curriculum that I needed to really be in that seat of leadership. And I felt like it had through this whole unraveling and rebuilding. But at 3 times during this 3 hour conversation, this man looks at me and he says, I feel like I just need some guidance in my life right now. And it was like God like elbowing me. And on the third time he said it, I was like, I'm thinking about doing some coaching. You'd be my first client. I don't really know what it would look like. What do you think about 6 weeks? You can pay me $100 and like, let's see how it goes. He was like, yeah, let's do it. And so I started working with him and like really got evidence like I can do this and I'm good at this. And he got great results. He ended up posting a testimonial online. Someone in his network, random, hit me up. We had a call and he ended up, you know, selling me 4 figures by the end of that call. And that was my first paid client. And from there, it's been mostly like in-person events and referral-based clients. So, yeah.
I love that you are willing to start humbly. I feel like that is something that is being lost these days, where people are going out there because of coaches training coaches and training coaches out there, and everybody wants this big promise, and that's how they get people in. But we do need to make sure we're good at what we're doing, and it's your first client. So I love that you started that way, but I also love that it paid off very quickly with the results that you were able to deliver. But I want to dive into what you spoke about, because your story is just so interesting about this sort of performative masculinity. And we were chatting a little bit beforehand that it seems like people sort of swung to the opposite side of that, where there's toxic masculinity. And so now there's all these men that are, I need to do a short disclaimer. When I'm pregnant, I talk like wildly different than I do otherwise. And I almost said, called them PUSSYs. I have to like really watch myself. I have to give a disclaimer to everyone I speak to. I'm like, what the fuck is happening over here? Anyways, I don't know where the crassness is coming from, but it went to these like soft, beta men, honestly, if I'm being honest. And it's been interesting watching it through like lenses of politics, because it feels like one side is kind of pushing that toxicity side and the other side is pushing that. I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm just never going to get wet for you if you're a beta male. Like this is never going to happen. I want to be led. I kind of want to be tossed around. So what is that third option that often gets skipped over?
Yeah, it's funny that that word came to your head of PUSS. IES, and then on the other end there's like these big swinging DICKs that are like out of their pants. It's like, put that away. Like, we know that you're a man. You don't have to try so hard to show us. And it is evident in the political parties. And I think on one side, you have those men who are trying to control people and seeking power over and trying to like shout from the mountaintop that like, I am a leader and I am good enough and I am worthy, right? And then on the other side, there's like these gentlemen, as we call them, betas. And many of them have the capacity for leadership, but they see those examples and they're just so loud. They're like, I never want to show up like that. So let me just play it really small here on the complete other side of the spectrum. And so when we talk about the third way, because that's a false dichotomy, and it's presented in a way, and we know that the radical sides are always the loudest, and it's hard for people to see like what else is there, especially if you didn't have a good male role model growing up, which so many men didn't. I think there's like 2 in 5 households in the United States don't have a father there. And so the third way, it sounds like a paradox. There's a book called Strong and Weak by a guy named Andy Crouch. And he says, it's to be strong and weak. And another way to put that is to have authority, but also be vulnerable. Is also to acknowledge your own fallibility as a person, and still with that present, be bold enough to say how you feel, to stand by your values, and to decide that there is a hill that you're willing to die on. And that hill is going to be different for every man. You might have to build it yourself, but there needs to be something that is not up for debate in the way that you show up in the world. And that thing also has to be rooted in love and presence and in a desire to take responsibility for and to be in service of.
I love that. Because I feel like we have a lot of, not always misconceptions, because I think it's one of those things that, again, is just a inherited belief that we don't often question, but we have these visuals or these ideas of what leadership actually looks like. I actually really did not identify with the idea of being a leader until well into my entrepreneur journey, even though I had actually kind of been one looking back my entire life. I always was the first to stand up, kind of did my own thing. There were plenty of places that I also absorbed and followed and whatnot. But it wasn't until I consciously claimed the idea of being a leader, that I was able to see all of the blind spots of where I wasn't being a leader. And I think too, what I've learned is I used to view leadership as leading others. And now I really view it as being the leader of my own life, really leading my life with intention. And then by default, you sort of gain influence because people want to do that also. But if you're out there trying to influence, trying to persuade too much, people feel that. And I think they tend to lean back rather than lean in.
Yeah, and that's the feeling of being manipulated, right? And that's
Yeah.
what we see of these poor examples of leadership. And I love how you said that you've come to learn that leadership is leading yourself. And I think that there's so much power in that because it's like when I'm a leader, I am not saying that every man should have 3 eggs, half an avocado, and 2 chicken sausages for breakfast like I do. But it is a call to understand what your truth is and how to live in that. Seeing somebody living in their truth, filling a room with their presence is inspiring. And sometimes the first step is you see somebody like that and you're like, I do want to be a little bit more like that person. Because from your vantage point, you can't see your mountaintop. And so you be a little bit more like them. You start taking care of yourself better. And then you get to a new place and you see, oh, actually, I wasn't meant to be him. I was meant to be me. And from this place, I can see more of what that looks like. The clouds are clearing and the mountaintop is beginning to come into view.
That's a beautiful way to describe the process. It reminds me of, have you ever read that book, Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon?
I haven't read it.
It's super short. Highly recommend it. But it's a great book because it actually talks about how the idea of stealing like an artist is first, it's really hard to go and be like, okay, I'm going to be a painter and just develop your own style. Or I'm going to be a writer and just start writing in your own style. Quite often we study and we model the greats. And so maybe you're trying to paint like Van Gogh, trying to paint like Picasso, trying to paint, I don't know a lot of painters clearly, but, and so you copy them and you try to get as identical as possible. I did that with singing, actually. I used to practice like getting the Britney Spears voice and then like the Shania twang. And, and then I learned how to, I don't like the word manipulate, but it feels fitting here, like manipulate my own voice to kind of find my own style. And the same happens with whatever your medium of creation is. You first begin by modeling, and we even do it as children where we're trying to be like our parents. And then we hit that teenage years and we're like, actually, this doesn't feel right when I do it like my mom. I think it might feel better over here. And that's the process of life. And so often people don't know where to start because they're like, I don't want to copy somebody else. But that's actually just how you develop your skills, that develop the confidence to then be comfortable enough to start coloring outside the lines a bit and finding your own flow.
Yeah, I think that's how we're wired as social creatures. We are who we are in relation to others. And you talk about this having a model being so important. And I think that that's one of the major things that's missing among men is there's not a model. Maybe there is a dad in the home, but he is so busy providing that he's never actually present. And so the boy never really learns what it means to walk in love and to truly lead. Or maybe the dad's not there. And so, that's something that I believe firmly is that every boy, every man has the right to a great masculine role model, whoever that may be. And then the other piece is it's like this is missing from our culture. It's in ancient cultures. There's no really initiation from boy to man. There's no ritualized process to say, okay, like you're now a man and these are the things that you're leaving behind that were on the table as a boy and what you're being asked to step into as a leader of yourself first and then of others.
Although I think it's a really beautiful idea to do that. Since I'm going to have
Absolutely.
3 boys, I might create that at certain ages because some cultures have it built in. And I think sometimes we've lost the intention about it, at least in America. I think other cultures might place more of an emphasis, but like we've got quinceañera for certain
Yeah.
cultures and things like that. But just like I said, there was a moment of actually realizing I needed to claim consciously the idea of leadership in my life. And I embodied it on a new level, even if I didn't necessarily learn much more in between there or change much about what I was doing. There was a flip in the mindset. And so creating some sort of ritual could be really powerful.
Totally. And just a quick note about like your style of leadership. We talked about authority with vulnerability. It's like your style of leadership has largely been simply sharing your story as vulnerably and as powerfully as possible. And people see that and it's like, oh, Melissa did that. That's my permission slip to start playing with this and having some courage of sharing more about who I am.
So I know you also do quite a bit of work with your partner, Jessica, and you work with couples sometimes as well. And so I know there's a lot of women in my audience also.
Yeah.
What if they're listening to this and they're thinking, my man could also step out of his panties a little bit, or he could put that dick away. Also, like one of the two. How do you guys approach that when you're coming in a relationship, both with two couples or two people in couple that are willing to come together for this, but also for maybe somebody who's listening and their husband's not on board, but they want a gentle nudge or inspiration?
Yeah. So everybody that goes to couples counseling is there because their partner is the problem, right? And so that's the first thing that has to get leveled out is if you're really looking to evolve your relationship, is both partners have to come to the table with a willingness to learn, grow, and take responsibility. Jessica and I, in our partnership, we don't believe in this 50-50 thing. It's 100-100. If there is ever, and this is what we share with the people that we work with, if there's ever any disconnection between us or any rupture, there were contributions from both ends. Even if at the initial first glance, I look at it and I say, there's no possible way that I had anything to do with this, or Jessica thinks the same thing. When I think that, it's like, I need to really scrutinize and retrace my steps to see how I contributed. Because if we come to the table and instead of blaming and pointing the finger, I say, I found my part in this. And she says, I found my part in this too. It's no longer me versus her. And it never was. It's us versus the issue. And so that is like the foundation that needs to be set before any sustainable work can be done within a partnership.
I agree completely. I've said this 1,000 times and my audience probably thinks I'm bragging by now, but I will say that I think one of the things I'm most proud of in my life is my relationship. I am also lucky enough to have committed to somebody after we've already bonded over this idea of sort of conscious self-exploration. We were both on that growth path. So we were pretty confident we were growing together. And it's funny because I would share with people like, yeah, if you're arguing with your partner and you're like coming and like, you did this, you did that, it's not going to land. The defenses are going to go up quite quickly. And I have tried to do that really since my late 20s of whatever relationship it is. Okay, what is my part? And I'll come with that. And it is so much easier when your partner is the kind of person that's like, okay, thank you. Like now I can more easily come with my side. There are people who have the partners where they're like, well, glad you're owning up to it because you were wrong. And it's really hard to want to do it again in that situation. But I also noticed in the beginning of doing this, it felt a little fake. If I'm honest, I would come and I'd be like, yep, I'm 5 to 7% wrong, but I'm going to own up to that. But because he met me there, it would soften me a little bit and then I'd be able to come a little closer. But now the more I practice this, the more I see, even if the fight was initiated by something he said, even if it does feel out of it, I can still see like my 50% in it. It becomes so much easier to see how everything comes together, how even if you can trace it just back further, or with the look that you gave, or it's like, okay, yes, you didn't say that thing. And so you might think, well, yeah, I never said all the things that were on my mind and he did. But were you thinking them while you were looking at him? Because you probably had a face and he was probably reading it all over
Right.
you. Just because you didn't actually say doesn't mean you weren't holding that energy. And that matters too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the energy is so apparent, especially to women. Like, there are more times than I care to admit, times when Jessica names an emotion that I'm feeling before I've slowed down enough from my action-oriented masculinity to be able to face it. And so, for any men listening to this, it's like if your female partner brings that to the table of, hey, I think I'm sensing this thing within you, your first inclination likely will be to say, no, I'm fine, brush it off the table and continue checking off your to-dos. But that's really a moment to build trust in her and to build understanding of yourself. The feminine intuition is such a gift, and it's so sad how much it gets dishonored, because it's intangible. It's not. The masculine does things, the feminine feels things and sees things that are unseen. And so, yeah, for any man listening, it's like, really listen. And I love how you were sharing of like, it's a practice, like it gets easier. And none of us were trained in emotional regulation and speaking the needs that we fear are going to result in a loss of love or our partner leaving, and being able to stay in the discomfort. There's so many people that think like, I can't go through a hard thing with this person and come out okay. So I'm not going to go through any of these hard things. I'm just going to brush everything underneath the rug. And Jessica and I use this metaphor of, our rug lies flat. That means if there is a crumb, anything that feels like it's a little bit off, even if it's nothing, we talk about it, because it's like, you don't do that enough times and you sweep things under the rug. Eventually there's this massive lump on the ground and somebody's going to trip over it and get hurt in a number of different ways, the worst of which are physical and emotional abuse, um, cheating, and then just withdrawal and living in a house together where you feel like roommates.
Yeah. And that's one thing I'm really grateful about. I think my husband's parents modeled love, even in a physical way, really well. And so he's been the leader in that. I'm more moody. So, especially if I'm pregnant or postpartum or all of these life phases that have such an effect, where I'm just like, I don't want to be touched for 3 weeks, honestly. But he has always prioritized or been open about how that physical connection is really important to him. And it doesn't have to be sex, it can be like cuddling in the morning. And so I was resistant, I think, at certain points and earlier in the relationship. But I've learned, because maybe during those resistant phases, I can feel the disconnection. And even if we have a hard day and then we don't really let fights last longer than, I mean, we don't fight that often, but like if we have a disagreement, we're pretty good at resolving it right away. But I'll make sure that we have that physical intimacy, whether it's just cuddling or we took this intimacy course once. It was actually had a lot of really awkward moments, and not from us. It was really weird. I could tell a whole episode about that. But one thing we gained from it was this idea of landing. Like when you come into the house, it's so easy to just kind of get on with your day, but no, come together. How was your day? Give a kiss, like a hug, like just land, come together in just a moment of stillness. Things like that can make a really big difference.
Yeah, and that's, you mentioned right at the beginning, you were like, my husband has been the leader in this regard. And what I teach is that, like, that is one of the cores of masculinity, and relationship is such a incredible classroom. I don't think there's a better classroom than a romantic relationship to learn how to lead, because when a man leads in a relationship, he walks straight into the fire. He senses the disconnection. He knows where he dropped the ball. And instead of waiting for his woman to ask about it, he says, this is what happened. I've already done some, it's not, this is what happened, and I'm going to dump it at your feet. I've already done some processing on my end. This is what I think contributed to it. And this is what I feel like we could do moving forward. And that's not like cut and dry, sign the agreement and move on. He's inviting her into the conversation, but he's already provided like a lattice framework for the conversation to start, instead of her just like picking up the pieces, because that erodes trust. But coming to the table and leading that conversation and taking responsibility really builds it.
I want to go back to how you said that you kind of had the epiphany of how your illnesses were so symbolic of what you were meant to teach. And I want to come to this because I am fascinated by story in general. And one of the pieces of research that influenced what I teach now is Dan McAdams, who did a big study that showed that people with coherent life narratives have better outcomes versus fragmented life stories. And a lot of people don't really understand what that means. But sometimes it's really just finding that through line through everything. Like you can't own and embody that I'm a confident woman or I'm a leader if there's little parts of your story where you've never really integrated into the overall life arc. So how was figuring out the story, or what was that kind of aha moment for you? What was that kind of aha moment for you?
I think, a big aha moment was within Story Love, with the tools that you provided us. It's like I already knew the whole story, but this tie into the somatic intelligence and the direct energy centers that were acting up for me was like, whoa, this isn't so much. At the time, I was kind of like, I'm doing relationship coaching, and that still is a big piece of what I do. But the core of it is masculine leadership. And that's what I was really disconnected from. In that relationship where I was experiencing erectile dysfunction, I was just giving in to everything and like digging and like not digging my heels in on anything. There's no spine, right? And so that was a big epiphany. And then there's, a complementary track, which are the long-term romantic relationships that I've experienced. And, I've learned things through each of those.
Mm. It's interesting that you use the word spine. I just immediately got a visual because he like there's this ED piece of it. There's the pineal gland, and the spine literally is the main highway of communication between the two. And you're like, there is no spine. And I was like, oh my gosh, your book just keeps getting better in my mind.
Yeah. There's a lot of symbols for sure.
So say you're working with somebody that's having trouble really expressing. They're in that sort of toxic masculinity, and not necessarily toxic to other people. I think where toxic masculinity shows up most is actually inside, like for themselves. They're like not expressing. Not everyone is that like chauvinistic man out there. But how do you coach people to begin to open up and feel again?
Well, the first thing is just establishing trust. And that takes a different duration of time for each man. But the healing that can happen from a man showing up, just signing up to do one-on-one coaching for most men is a massive hurdle to say, I need help. And I haven't been able to figure this out myself. And so the first thing is like just sitting with that man and allowing him to express that in any way that he needs to, all the areas of his life where he feels like he's failed, the parts of himself that he's deemed unlovable, unacceptable, and having nothing change in my nervous system, in my heart, in the way that I'm holding him in love. So creating that coherence, creating that safety by maintaining a grounded nervous system, by not reacting and saying, oh my God, that's like the worst thing ever, dude. You suck, right? Doing the exact opposite of that and carrying this energy of love is like, oh shit, okay, I am not the worst guy in the world. And then we can start the work together.
What about for the female side of that? I know that the way a woman receives that emotion or that vulnerability can have a really big effect on whether or not the man keeps taking those steps forward.
I think this goes for all humans is that so many of us are uncomfortable with big emotions like grief, shame, embarrassment, guilt, and sometimes, unfortunately, when a man brings that to the table, a woman is like, yuck. And there's some skill, there's something I call skillful vulnerability with men. Again, not dumping it at her feet, having, a way to go about that allows you to build trust and create safety and invite her in. But what's so present in so many humans is we're so uncomfortable with our own grief, with our own shame, with our own guilt, that when it shows up in somebody else, it's like, we've got to get out of here. Like for years, I didn't know how to support people who were mourning the loss of a loved one. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. And the truth is, I didn't never had to learn what to say. I just had to get in touch and develop a relationship with my own grief. And then once I did that, I didn't need any tactics. So it's like women need to develop some emotional skills as well. Men aren't the only ones that are suppressing those hard emotions.
That is such a good point because we've been told we're too much quite often. I
Hmm.
was told I was too sensitive my whole life. I'm still told that. It's so funny how I've done so much work that it doesn't affect me anymore when it comes from the one person that it used to influence me through, where I'm just more like, wow, okay, I see why this was so hard for me for so many years. Like, this is
Hmm.
how I was met. But there's something too about, yeah, receiving. The word receiving is, I really developed a new relationship with it through, I think, living in Los Angeles. You get to hear a new aspect of it quite a bit, but through just the work where you don't realize how often you either cling or resist something, whether it's emotional, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a belief. It's like we're either grasping it because we don't want to lose it, or we're pushing it away because we're not used to it showing up in that form. And so, do you have any practices with your partner where you just create presence regularly? Or what are some of the things that you guys might do in a relationship that isn't in the typical conventional relationship?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind, and this is like the proactive stuff. The reactive stuff is like, oh, some shit just went down, and now I need to remain steady in the storm. But the proactive stuff is we have relationship check ins every 2 weeks where we get to share things like like I'll ask her, how have I loved you well the past 2 weeks? She'll ask me the same thing. How could I have loved you better? It's not what did I do wrong? It's how could I have loved you better the past 2 weeks? What do you want to experience together the next 2 weeks? Right. And those questions might change, but creating a really intentional space for you to talk about nothing else but your relationship. Because life gets so loud. There's family, there's kids, there's jobs. Jessica and I do a lot of work together. There's exciting projects, right? And creating space for it to just be about us and our relationship is one of the massive regular things that I recommend for all couples to do.
In one of those check ins, has anything ever come up that you weren't expecting? And how did you handle it?
We handle things in the moment so well that there is usually very little that's a surprise in those check-ins beyond the things of like, how did I love you well? Sometimes there's like a sweet thing that I did that I forgot about. I'm like, oh, great. I'm like, thank you for acknowledging that. But, it's mostly kind of like a recap. Like, are there any threads that we didn't completely tie when it happened in the moment? Any emotions that are still lingering that we need to seal? So it's really maintenance for us.
Okay, now I want to cover that sort of beta male side because
Hmm.
yes, it can be difficult for the more manly men to kind of touch with their emotions, but when you've already softened to the point of sort of losing that thread of leadership, I would say, or yeah, you don't feel like you can lead, whether it's in your relationship or just within yourself. How do you begin to bring out the leader in someone like that?
Yeah, so those guys are really living like they want to take up as little space as possible. Like they want to leave zero footprint and zero impact. And so those guys have developed a belief, it's so much more than mindset, it's also within the nervous system, that the world is not safe unless I'm standing within this tiny little box that I've built for myself. Like I'm safe here. And so it's about helping them learn that there's safety outside of that box. It's about helping them shift from what if everything goes wrong to even if everything goes wrong, I still know who I am. So it's a process of building self trust. And so often it is some external steps once we've had the conversation of safety and they've understood where they are losing life and lacking life because of this desire to remain small, of what is the smallest step that you can take forward that would allow you to gather evidence that you can be a little bold and still be okay. Is there a conversation? And you know, for most of these guys, it's really small stuff. Do you need to tell your roommate that you don't like it when he leaves his paper towels on the counter, right? And it's like more often than not, you know, we'll workshop that conversation. More often than not, you have that conversation, and the roommate's like, "Oh, thanks for telling me. Like, I had no idea I was doing that. Thanks for bringing." And they're like, "Oh, wow." People are like grateful that I'm speaking honestly and saying how I feel. And so, yeah, it's like a step function of let's do the little things and just teach you that it's okay. And then eventually you can quit your job and start your dream.
Yeah, so many things come down to just building that evidence because we don't realize that by living within the story we're living in, we are manufacturing a reality in which we are only building evidence for our current belief system. So we have to step out of our comfort zone just a little bit in order to create evidence for a new storyline. And so I love leaving listeners with one thing to do, whether it's to think about or to practice. It might be the thing that you just shared with us, but what would you leave listeners with?
Yeah, so for any man who's looking to create more fulfillment, exhilaration in his life, or to generate more trust from his partner, is that it starts within and you have to develop the self trust. So, what I'm going to prescribe is what we just talked about. It's what is the smallest next step out of your comfort zone. A good kind of criteria for this is it feels 75% exciting and 25% really scary. And can you do that thing? And before you do that thing, do the two ends of the stick exercise, which is on one end of the stick, it goes better than you could have ever imagined. What does that look like? And then what's the worst that it could possibly go? And if that happens or anything near to it, decide how you're going to care for yourself ahead of taking that step. Because if it works out, awesome, you have that new evidence. And if it doesn't, and you know how to care for yourself, you have the evidence that you can be okay in hard times, that you can be okay when stuff goes south, which is so important for men because we are meant to take risk. Being bold, speaking your mind is risky and it's not going to work out on the positive end of the stick every time. But you need to be able to dust yourself off, understand which way is up, and continue.
That's so brilliant. I know watching the men in my life, I'm going to use air quotes, but fail, like something doesn't turn out the way they want. It's almost heartbreaking for me because I can see how much they beat themselves up, like way more than I do. Or maybe I can just read it all over their faces, but I'm always like, let me just fix everything for you. And so to have your backup plan, like, okay, if it doesn't go well, how am I going to take care of this? How am I going to care for myself? That is such the epitome of leadership, because how are you going to take care of your children when things don't go their way? When you're with your wife, when things don't go their way? If that's how you're beating yourself up when you fail, they're going to see that, and it's not going to feel real when you try to tell them, oh, failure is a part of the process, or it's good to fail, if you're over there on the other end doing the exact opposite.
Yeah, and I'll share a piece about self beat up is that often men are trying to alleviate this underlying belief of I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I need to earn love. And if that's there and they fail, the self beat up is so much greater because that story comes alive. So we haven't talked about this, but the spiritual component of understanding I am worthy, I don't need to earn love, I am good enough just because I've been gifted with this human existence. If you can develop some of that, trying and failing becomes exhilarating and not self-reducing.
Oh, such a good note to end on. So for listeners that are intrigued and they want to know how to hear more from you or work with you, where's the best place for them to connect?
Yeah, the best place to connect is my partner Jessica and I's website, thewellworshipedman.com. You'll find links to my Instagram, her Instagram, our podcast, our newsletter. Everything is there.
Your challenge for this week is to stop playing it so darn safe. And also check out the links at mindlove.com/422. Pick one thing that's been sitting on your mental shelf collecting dust because it feels too risky. Use Isaac's 75-25 rule. If it's 75% exciting and 25% terrifying, you're in that sweet spot. But before you do it, play out both ends. Best case scenario, write it down. Worst case scenario, write that down too. And then decide how you're going to take care of yourself if it goes sideways. So this isn't just about building courage. It's about proving to yourself that you can handle whatever life throws at you. The Stoics had this practice called negative visualization. It sounds depressing, but it's actually pretty brilliant. They would imagine losing everything that they cared about, not to manifest disaster, but to build mental resilience. When you've already walked through the worst case scenario in your mind and made peace with it, everything else becomes manageable. Your nervous system learns that you're just not as fragile as you think you are. And that's real spiritual work right there, not all the fluffy stuff, the kind that actually changes how you show up in the world. So give it a try and let me know how it goes. You can reach out to me at mindlovemelissa on Instagram. You can find all my amazing sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And don't forget to sign up for the Morning Mind Love at mindlove.com, just to wake up a little bit inspired. You know, sometimes it's hard to start the day on the right note, but when you get that note right in your inbox, it makes it a little bit easier. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.